Hello, ladies, and welcome to Homemakers Radio. Hope you get a few things done while you listen today. I'm Mrs. Sherman. I'm broadcasting from one of the quieter places in the manse, back in the room where I do my ironing and other things, correspondence and such, when there's no one here. And we're having a quiet day today, so I got to come here and talk to you. And I'm so glad to see you, and so glad that you're here, because if you weren't here, I wouldn't be doing this. I'm leaving these for my descendants, but until then, you're my motivation, and I love your comments. If you would go to the link in the description box on the channel, you can find out where my blog is, where I place this video, and see the rest, see some of the pictures, and leave a comment if you like. And also, if you're not comfortable with that, you may email me, and I will try to leave that on the post for you. And lately I have been talking about courtship and a few other things, but first, we have to take care of business. We've got to get ready for the job, which is the best job you can ever get. Back in the olden days, even when the book Christie was written, all of you know that book. Catherine Marshall was made into a movie series, and Christie was asked by Miss Alice, what are you doing here? Why do you want to come out here and teach school? And she said, I want to make a difference. And every book we ever read, there was someone in there saying they just wanted to be a difference. But at home is where we need the difference. At home is where we are molding people to go out and make a difference in their own homes. And the best place that you can make a difference is in your home. You will see that we are not just involved with ourselves, but with future generations. In the home is the most pliable, powerful place that you can be right now. And don't ever think that you're so proud of your education that you've got to go make a difference somewhere, because here you can make a difference. Instead of outsourcing everything to some other professional, why don't you be the professional at home and make a difference? You can take care of your people at home, you can sew at home, you can create at home, you can even teach your own children at home, you can teach yourself, and I am a veteran homeschooler, and so I'm hoping to pass on some things to you that missed out on it, and maybe you would like to be homeschooled even if you're a great-grandmother. And so I would like to talk about making a difference, and you will see that your days at home do make a difference. Even if you're not feeling well, your very presence lights the home. It's very important that you be there. You're a stabilizing influence on everyone. And I have a few things I might want to read to you today. Now, the reason that I use books is because most of them are general, they're copyright free. I'm not talking about someone I know, and although it has got me in trouble a couple of times. Once I read something from the Declaration of Independence, and somebody thought I was talking about them because it had a lot of accusations at the beginning of it, talking about, was it King George III of England, and it was saying he has taken away our freedom, and he has charged us for things, and he has done a lot of things, terrorized us and everything. And he was the one that we get the Regency era from, because the Parliament apparently at that time in the 1776 deemed him unable to rule. So they retired him and replaced him with what was called a regent, and it was the regent that gave us this wonderful Regency era that we all love so much. And he wanted to promote the gentleman farmer and nature, and kind of bring that up into a higher status. And so that's where we get our dear Jane Austen and other people. And but I did make a bit of a problem quoting that one time, because someone thought that they were being maligned because they were so ignorant. They didn't know the preamble to the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, and thought that someone was talking about them. And I think I had printed it up in a little newsletter. But I do use books because they're usually copyright free, and the books contain reports in it that I couldn't get myself, and that's what I have relied on. Also, because they often, even if they're fiction, generally talk about matters that we are concerned with in the home. In fact, all of Jane Austen's novels, they were written for the amusement of her family members, and she often had characters in there that, of course, they knew about, and it enriched their family life. And so I enjoy using the books. And so today, also want to talk about that poem, Hurry the Baby. And I'll see if I can find it here, if you want to just pause for a minute and give my voice a chance to rest. And I'll read it to you, because some of you ladies at home that have children or grandchildren will be interested in this poem. I used to know it by heart, but as I have got more vital, I have forgotten some of it. So it's a poem called Hurry the Baby by Nixon Waterman. Yeah, I don't know when it was, and it was called Making a Man. It's really a sad poem here. And I would like to end it by saying, shame on us if we've done any of this. Hurry the baby fast as you can. Hurry him, worry him, make him a man. Off with his baby clothes, get him in pants. Feed him on brain foods and make him advance. Hustle him soon as he's able to walk. Into a grammar school, cram him with talk. Fill his poor head full of figures and facts. Keep on a-jamming them in till it cracks. Once boys grew at a rational rate. Now we develop a man while you wait. Rush him through college, compel him to grab of every known subject a dip or a dab. Get him in business and after the cash, all by the time he can grow a mustache. Let him forget he was ever a boy. Make gold his god and its jingle his joy. Keep him hustling and clear out of breath until he wins nervous prostration and death. And I was thinking about that word wins. We don't want to just get through hard times when raising children and making decisions. We don't want to just get through it. We want to win. We want to make sure that we win the right things. And this poem is, I should probably put it on the post for you, because I'm thinking, what a shame. The first thing that I noticed here was feed him on brain foods and make him advance. And how often, back in the 70s, when we who are vital were having our children, that was all the talk. It was just, feed him this is good for his brain. And I told you before, one of the things I'm the most concerned about is that Christians have started admiring people because they're smart, instead of because they belong to someone on this earth and God created them and they're good. And we do tend to admire people because they're smart. And even homeschoolers have to be careful of this, because there'll be reports out there that homeschoolers are in the top 10 percentile of scholastic achievement or something like that. But who cares about that if they can't? You can give people knowledge, but you have to show them how to use it, and wisdom and understanding. The Bible talks a lot about knowledge, but it is to be used with wisdom, understanding, and good judgment, and love. And I think Helen Andelin had written something like that in Fascinating Womanhood. She had a chapter on careers, about careers for women, and she was saying people laud these careers, these talented women that have all these careers, but nobody ever talks about love as something that is very, very important. And so being a homemaker, being home, there is a great service there. Maybe you don't see it in the way that academia sees it, but many of us were very blessed because our parents and grandparents were home. And so we have that in the past to look to. And the Bible tells us in Titus 2 to guard and guide the home. Well, you can't do that if you're not there, or if nobody's there with you, if the children are all farmed out somewhere else and outsourced somewhere else. So I wanted to lecture you a little bit about that, because this being home is neither confining or unvarying, as Mrs. Bennett said. If you learn to discipline yourself, that is hard. If you, like me, grew up in a public school and you had all those years of someone mapping out your life and your time by the hour, it's very hard to face a household alone. Let's say your children are very little, or they're grown and gone. There's no one there to tell you what to do next, and that's why you have to develop some self-discipline, some self-control. And I always say it starts with the list. If you can make yourself obey it. And I don't take myself too seriously sometimes. I've got this list, but I look at it and think, well, who does she think she is telling me what to do? And then I don't do some of it. And we also have to, one of the things that Sidetracked Home Executives taught when it first came out back in the 70s was you have to overcome the habit of waiting till you feel like doing something before you do it. And so they developed this card file system where when the card came up, you would do it whether it was shining or cold. An in-house thing. I mean, she wasn't talking about yard work or anything like that, but you would do it whether you felt like it or not, and then you would overcome yourself and not be guided all the time by whether you were in the mood to do it. And I do think this is one thing I'm going to discuss when my son comes over. We do this mutual homeschooling once a week, and I'm going to ask him what he thinks the purpose of feelings are, because we're told, not to trust our feelings, not to always trust our heart, but how do you guide it, and how do you guard it, and how do you discipline it to work for you? And we're going to be discussing that, so I'll have something to report, I hope. So now I have read to you the Hurry the Baby poem, and I don't want everything to make you feel bad, so we will get on to something a little bit better here for the home. Now, I had been discussing with you the courtship model on how we need to get it. Simple Social Graces, she talked about how they took courtship off of the front porch and just made and put it in the car so that no one else knew what was going on, and also because there was no accountability that way. And so I had been really interested in that, and I had been reading Stepping Heavenward, where there was a little, it's done in diary form, and so I've been enjoying reading this story, and it was designed to help, in the 1800s, to help young women steer themselves right in good character. And so I had been reading this and thinking what a brilliant idea that was to put it in diary form. And if you can, get yourself a little book and start keeping a diary, because one of the things that I regret is being so busy when my children were little that I didn't take time to sit down and write down their first words and their first steps. And I know generally it's in my memory, but I didn't take time to take note of all these little things, and didn't think anyone would be interested in it, didn't even think they would be interested in it, but it would have been a good idea. If you're not doing that, it's not too late to start. Firsts, and also just general things you all did, because one day, when they kind of lose their balance in life, or their roots, and get distracted or something, they'll know what they were like and what their home was like, and it might mean something to them. And so many of us were so busy, we did not stop to do that. And but I know that there is a generation that is doing that, which is very, very good. And so I would like to also go back and talk about parents' authority, and warn that we who grew up in the public schools, we were not educated to be authoritative, because we were always under some kind of authority. We were under authority at school. We were under authority at work, everywhere. Everything was, we were under the authority, and away from our parents too. And because through the most teachable moments of the day, being taken out and put in public school was very bad for the family. Also bad for the Lord's church, because Now what we have is people that are in the Lord's church that are really part of that public school culture. They think that way, and even the churches sometimes are somewhat patterned after the schedules and the activities of what they experienced in the public school. And so parents have a hard time. We're polite, we've been taught to be polite, not to be bossy, not to take authority. But that's a mistake, because God says, children, obey your parents in the Lord. And it talks in Deuteronomy 6 and Ephesians 6, if you can just remember those two. Deuteronomy 6 talks about how you shall teach your children as you sit in your house, as you walk by the way, and as you lay down at night. You shall teach. And then Ephesians 6, children, obey your parents. And, we turn them out when they're very little. They go somewhere else, and they're obeying a lot of other parents, a lot of other people. And that eventually they get tired of it. They get tired of everyone being an authority. But I think it messes up the whole idea that God had, that the parents would be the authority. Now, you look at how many authorities they have. How many authorities did you have during the day? You probably had a bus driver. You probably had a teacher for each subject. You probably had, in sports, some kind of sports teacher. If you took drama, if you took anything like that, everybody had some other authority to look up to, and there's so many of them. But when you homeschool, you limit that authority to one person. And you've got to be careful, because you may have books and knowledge, but pretty soon you've got to be careful that the children know who their God-given authority is, and not use the books and depend on them. They're there for our learning, but even if you taught them a whole lot of Bible verses, it doesn't guarantee that they are going to develop character, because knowledge is nothing without adding a character quality to it. So one of the enjoyable things about homeschooling is you get to figure out how you're going to create character, how you're going to apply it to their heart, because they can have a lot of Bible knowledge and still you could lose them. So we need to apply it to their heart. And I think you as parents can figure out how to do that with everything that you read in the Bible. And when my son comes over, we use some of these other books, and I read to him. I even have read to him out of the Jane Austen diet about sleep habits of the Regency era, before industrialization. As somebody, and we were both discussing the fact that somebody came along when the factories came along and said, okay, 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of work, and 8 hours of play. And we were discussing how dare they, who did they think they were turning it into 8 hours? And a lot of people can't sleep 8 hours. And then they think they have a sleep disorder. And yet, before industrialization, I read to you that part about sleep like a Victorian, how people would sleep for a while and then they would get up maybe and be up a couple hours and go back to bed till 8 o'clock. And now if you do that, and people try to make the babies sleep through the night and everything, and how bad that's been for our health. But we were both talking about the arrogance of whoever it was that said, and I might have even been one of the great industrialist inventors or something, 8 hours of sleep and 8 hours of play and 8 hours of work. And it was the idea was to send somebody to work for 8 hours. And we were just discussing this and questioning it all, because in the Bible, David talked about the watch. I told you in a previous video about the watch and how it came to be. There was the first watch, the second watch, the third watch, and it was, I believe in Hebrew times, it was 3 hours or 4 hours, and then in Roman times it was changed slightly. And it was from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And David mentioned that during a certain watch, he would seek the Lord. He would get up and pray. And so this was discussed in a lot of articles now that you can find online about how people used to sleep. And so we were discussing that and how our authority as parents is questioned. We question our own authority. We listen to other people. And I remember from that poem, Hurry the Baby, this brought back a lot of memories, because in the 70s, those of us who were having children, they were all concerned about not letting them be children for very long. Take away their toys and put them away, or sell them in a garage sale. And so they take out from under them all their playtime and the time that they concentrated on. I have little grandchildren that lay down on the floor with tiny little cars, and they just kind of look at them like this, and they steer them around and everything. And I was thinking what good playtime that was for them. But when ours were little, people were really interested in early education. And I had fortunately read a book called Better Late Than Early. And it was, I can't think of who wrote that, but it was saying that their eyes and their ears are not fully developed till they're 9 years old, especially boys. And now we find them having learning problems because of early education. But I remember it was really pushing. People were really pushing, get them into preschool, get them into kindergarten, get them, And so because of what I had learned, I kept my boys from reading until they were 9 years old. And people were just terrible. I mean, even at church, But I waited, and they caught on so fast when it was time to learn to read. They caught on so fast that they did leaps and bounds ahead of the ones that had started when they were 5 years old. And I think that you should just wait until they're interested and then teach them how to read. And it doesn't have to be continual. They will catch on. There are 26 letters of the alphabet and 44 sounds. It's not rocket science. And it shouldn't take 12 years in an institution to learn. And so I will try to remember to put that on for you. Now, I want to talk about other things besides this mess of public schooling and how the authority has been taken away from parents. And I do hope to get to some really nice stuff pretty soon. But since there's nobody here, I want to take advantage of the time. So I'm rattling off as much as I can, and I hope you get a few things done. Now, this was called The Origin of Compulsory Education, and I got it off of Wikipedia. And it was written by Rockefeller and a man named Gates. Reverend Frederick T. Gates, business advisor to John D. Rockefeller in 1913. Okay? You can go look this up yourself. It's called Origin of Compulsory Education on Wikipedia. I will just read it to you. And I want you to note while I'm reading this what they were saying. They are advising a mediocre, neutral type of education that won't produce any inspiration in anybody, won't make an artist out of them, won't make a good father or husband out of them, won't make an honoring person or a person with a noble character or anything like that. It was bland. And those of you who are vital know what that's like. If you went through the public education system and then you homeschooled your own kids, it was electrifying. It was so different. It's so good. And I still feel sorry for myself sometimes because I didn't get to be homeschooled. It would have been so different for me. I would have been able to focus so much better. I would have not been distracted by what other people were doing or saying. And I think that this will help you if you have been public educated and you feel like you missed out on something. I want to read this to you so you'll be aware. Okay? Note that neither Rockefeller or Gates were ever educators, nor learned men. They were into eugenics. Now, I put that there because a lot of these people that got into education and got into the education system didn't know anything about education. They were in it for the money they could extract from it and the control over people's beliefs and minds. And of course, they wanted a one world government, of course, where they would be at the top somewhere. So here is what this man Gates said, who was some kind of a financial, business advisor to John D. Rockefeller Sr. in 1913. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. Doesn't that sound conceited? The present educational conventions fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. Look how he looked down on rural folk, and how he says they were perfectly docile, and that the present educational conventions fade from their minds. Well, he's talking about the Victorian era. Remember, I read in Linda Lichter's book, her history book on the Victorian era, how people demeaned it in the 1900s. So this was written in 1913, which was a few years past the Victorian era. Let me continue. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. Now, I went through a stage in my life where I wondered why, after 12 years of public school, it didn't produce a writer, a poet, an artist, a preacher, a musician. Everything was just a dip and a dab, and it's just like that poem said, fill his poor head full of facts, a dip and a dab of everything. And it wasn't enough to grasp onto or to learn, and to keep us there day after day, especially through our teen years, was, I think, very bad for people. I think it was very bad all around. And so this was their point. We will not raise up from among them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for great artists, painters, musicians, or lawyers, doctors or preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have an ample supply. It's like saying, there's no room for anybody else. We've already got enough people in Congress, which always used to amuse me, how with all the people that have good sense and wisdom, there's only a few that they think are qualified to go into our government. Everybody should have a turn. They should let other people have a turn, and not stay in there forever. They're not the brightest. They're just not the brightest, The task we set before ourselves is very simple. Notice the conceit in this little thing he wrote in 1913 at the General Education Board in New York. The task we set before ourselves is very simple. I'm surprised that Linda Lichter didn't put this in her book, as well as a very beautiful one, to train these people as we find them to a perfectly ideal life just where they are. That's the education system. Yeah, very dulling too. So we will organize our children into a little community and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way. Doesn't that sound conceited? In the homes, in the shops, and on the farms. It's just a way of making slaves out of everyone, just dulling their minds. And of course they did that with the banal curriculums and the books and things that went through even when I was going to school. I remember getting all excited and going to first grade, and many of you who are vital remember this, and getting in there, and I thought we were going to read a book. I thought we were going to learn to read a book, and the book was so boring, and I couldn't quite catch on as to what they wanted. They're trying to teach us how to read, so they just used the simplest words, and somebody had created a book with a really dull story in it just so we would learn those words. And they make reading, too much education made reading a chore. And then we found people coming out of college that just didn't enjoy reading, did not enjoy getting into a good book and reading it, wasn't even curious. And what a difference it was when we began homeschooling. I noticed such a difference. Probably the parent is the one that benefits the most from it, because we get to throw off the shackles of our own religion and get into what is really important, and we start to understand life and understand the Bible, understand the home, and understand our children, and we might have done it kind of inadequately back in the 80s, but I think that eventually the next generation will live what we wanted for our children. The next generation will pick up on it and do it a little better. And so now, as far as decisions go for your parental authority, which I'm going to be talking about here, we should always err when you try to make a decision. I told you there's just pretend you're on one of these scales, balance scales. Remember they used to put the coins on one side and the gold on the other side in all the old westerns. And you have to just, when you are confronted with a decision that you have to make as a parent, I warned about, it's nice to phone around and get your opinion from your friends or whatever, but if something about it bothers you, just say no and always err on the side of caution. Do you remember that old saying, err on the side of caution? But there will be people that'll say you're going to really harm yourself and harm your kids if you don't do this or let them do that. And just remember, you're going to have to live with yourself too. And so you can always say what our parents said. When you are grown up and you have your children, you can do it differently. But this is what we're doing. This is what I'm doing. So now I want to go back into Princess Cut. And I know it seems like I'm kind of obsessed with this, but I'm just slowly kind of going through it and noticing some things. And I remember when I first watched it thinking, well, that's really cute. It had some funny parts in it and had some mix-ups in it and things like that. And I watched it again and I noticed how they covered nearly every base and every saying of people who were undermining the home and undermining the parents. And I want to just discuss some of this. This is a video story that covered a lot of bases. It covered the parents. It covered the grown children. It covered the smaller children too and how they were affected by their sister who was looking for a husband and was always disappointed. And it covered the man next door. It covered grown single men. And I'm seeing more in here as to what they were doing. The script writers must have had a lot of fun writing down everything they wanted to cover in this. And so here, let's just start with a part that I noticed the other day, and that was there was a brother that was real concerned. He was a little brother, and you would think the little brother or the little sister, they don't notice much, but they do. They pick up on a lot. And he noticed his sister coming home from these dates and events and places she'd been with someone she was hoping was going to pop the question, and he got really concerned, and she finally came home one day and said it was the worst night of her life, and her parents were really concerned about her. So the little brother took out an ad in the paper for someone to come and get his sister. And so I thought, well, that's real cute and that's real funny, and had all these characters at the door. There must have been at least 7 of them that would knock on the door answering this ad, and the father was looking at him and just shaking his head thinking these people are not suitable. And then I watched it again and I noticed that every character that came to the door covered one type of unsuitability that you would be looking at if you were a parent, whether it was a boy or a girl. One of them was real immature. He didn't have a job. Another one was someone who was not confident, so he brought a friend with him to the door to answer the ad. And another one was overly confident, and he had a big list of things he had accomplished in the business world. He was all dressed up in a suit. Another one came with real sloppy clothes on, and he was playing an electric guitar. I don't know how he did that, but he was playing very loud and trying to be quite the actor. And I got to looking at that again one day and discovered that if you had a list of things that would not be suitable, every one of those characters had one of those problems, that, and his father would shake his head at the door, no thanks, and so I thought that's quite clever how they did that. And So this was a video story that I have been kind of looking at to see what they're doing. Now there had been many before that we had watched in our family, but this is the most recent one, which I liked. I probably liked it the most. And so now we come to the parents. This was covered in here on things you're going to hear, and I thought at the time I was watching, and I was just more looking for entertainment in this movie, and it was faith based, so I thought okay, and I kind of overlooked it the first time, but then she had a friend, and the friend was dressed in a very trendy way. You might not have noticed, but it was very, very trendy, whereas Grace, she tried to dress up a little better, and so her friend, who was very trendy, was sympathizing with her because she'd had so many disasters on her dates and she hasn't been able to find anyone. And her friend said, if you want to change your luck, you're going to have to change your look. Stop dressing like your mother. So see, there is a saying we are going to hear. You shouldn't be dressing or fixing your hair or wearing makeup the way your mother taught you. Let's give you a new look or something like that. And nothing wrong with that, but still there was a demeaning attitude there. Stop dressing like your mother. And of course she was suggesting that she would be more attractive in a physical way. And then when Grace was calling her friend, and I told you before, she started out calling friends, and then she would talk to a counselor, and then finally went to her parents. But you should go to your parents at first, not at last. And so one of the things she said to her friend is, my parents are just not happy with these men that I've been meeting or hoping for husbands. And her friend said, quit worrying about what your parents want. So you see, they covered two things that you hear. You shouldn't be concerned about what your parents want. It's your life. You're the one that's going to be living with them. I heard that way back in the 60s. That started, I hadn't heard that before then, but that started way back there. You're the one that's going to be living with them. And what that was is to detach the future family from the family they belong to now. Just detach them all and you start over. You're on your own, and your parents aren't going to be living with them, so don't worry about who you choose, because it doesn't work that way. And so remember, you're going to go over to their house for Thanksgiving. They're going to come over to your house for Christmas, and we're going to share birthdays together, and we're going to be with the children and everything. So you've got to pick someone who likes your family. And so, but this was a big put down, these phrases this woman was using, and I thought it was very good they included that in the script. So your children, when they're younger, now you being the parent and the authority, you need to be aware of people's speech, the put downs against the parents or the rest of the family. Just be very sensitive to that. Because as Linda Lichter said in her book, courtship together was with family. It was all about family. In fact, the older people, the grandparents, were integral in matching up young people because they had knowledge about it and wisdom. And then they covered the grown man that was single, and he was grown and out away from his parents, having bought his own house. They covered that very interestingly, because he could have said, I'm an equal to Grace's father and mother. I live next door in my own house. I've got my own car. I've got my own career. He was all set up, and he could have just kind of equalized himself with them, but instead he went to them humbly and asked for their blessings and approval for getting together with their daughter with the prospect of marriage. And I thought there probably were a lot more things in that, and I will watch it again to see if I can get more ideas. Now, the idea too of what goes on in the courtship should be rather quick and not dragged out for 9 years or 5 years, because of wasting a lot of time, and then maybe having to break it off and taking up all that time when they could have been getting to know someone that would have been more appropriate. I'm not quite sure, but I noticed in this film that when Grace and Clint were together, it was with the family. He was happy to be in their house and eating with them and doing what they wanted to do, helping them on the farm, and also their recreation was all together. And yes, they were alone sometimes for important things, like, for instance, you saw them on the dock when Grace was sitting there alone. After he had asked the father for permission, he went to talk to her about it, to ask if it was okay with her. He cleared it with the father first. You always have to have the father on your side. You can't lose if you've got the dad on your side, and because he'll stick up for you. And I thought that was quite clever. And so that was that. And now I'm going to read a little bit from Stepping Heavenward, because it was done in diary form and it was written about a young girl. It started out rather negatively, I thought, but and I was reluctant to get into it, but it improved upon acquaintance. And so she starts out where she's met someone, but she can't see anything in him because he seems, I guess, he's the doctor and that takes care of these children in this village that she lives in. And she went to see, I believe it was the preacher's wife one day, and everyone is noticing that she's not being very kind to this young man, this young doctor, that she's helping her aunt with her children, and some of the children have gotten sick, and the doctor has dropped by a little more often, and so she's taken a dislike to him. And so on December 22, and I believe it was 1835, I have been to see Mrs. And this is from Stepping Heavenward by Mrs. E. Prentice, written in 1831. A lot of the homeschool girls were reading this when my daughter was young, and somehow we didn't have the same catalogs or something, but we just never, we may have had it, but we didn't get into it. And mostly we wrote our own stories, and we're always writing stories to each other, scripts and storylines, and we have a really good one coming up. We can't wait to sell it to Hallmark. I'm just kidding. I have been to see Mrs. Embury today. I believe that might have been a preacher's wife. She did not receive me as cordially as usual, and I very soon resolved to come away from her. She detained me, however. "Would you mind my speaking to you on a certain subject?" she asked, with some embarrassment. This would really make a good play. I felt myself flush. "I do not want to meddle with affairs that don't concern me," she went on. "But Dr. Elliot and I have been intimate friends all of our lives, and his disappointment has really distressed me. I believe in a previous entry I read to you where Dr. Elliot had come to tell her that he admired her, and she had rejected it. And so this woman has taken offense at it, and she said, "I do not want to meddle with affairs that don't concern me, but Dr. Elliot and I have been intimate friends all our lives, and his disappointment has distressed me." One of my moods came on, and I couldn't speak a word. "You are not at all the sort of girl I supposed he would fancy," she continued. "He always has said he was waiting to find someone just like his mother, and she is one of the gentlest, meekest, sweetest, and fairest among women. You ought to rejoice, then, that he has escaped the snare," I said in a husky voice, "and is free to marry his ideal when he finds her." "But that's just what troubles me. He's not free. He does not attach himself readily, and I'm afraid that it will be a long, long time before he gets over this unlucky passion for you." "Passion!" I cried contemptuously. She looked at me with some surprise and then went on. "Most girls would jump at the chance of getting such a husband." "I don't know that I particularly care to be classed as most girls," I replied loftily. "But if you only knew him as well as I do, he is so noble, so disinterested, and he's so beloved by his patients. I could tell you scores of anecdotes about him that would show you just what he is. She's trying to explain his true worth. Thank you, I said. I think we have discussed Dr. Elliot quite enough already. I cannot say that he has elevated himself in my opinion by making you take up in his defense. You do him injustice when you say that, she cried. His sister, the only person to whom he confided the state of things, begged me to find out, if I could, whether you had any other attachment, and if her brother's case was quite hopeless. But I am sorry I undertook this task, as it has annoyed you so much. I came away with a good deal feeling ruffled. When I got home, Mother said she was glad I had been out, at least for a little recreation, and that she wished I did not confine myself so much to the children. I said that I did not confine myself more than Auntie did. But that's different, Mother objected. She is their own mother, and love helps her to bear the burden. So it does me, I returned. I love those children dearly, exactly as if they were my own. That, she said, is impossible. I certainly do, I persisted. Mother would not dispute with me, though I wished she would. That's so typical, isn't it? No matter what era we live in, sometimes young people just want to argue. A mother, she said, receives her children one at a time and gradually adjusts herself to increasing burdens. But you take a whole houseful on yourself, and I'm sure it's too much for you. You do not look or act like yourself. It isn't the children, I said. Well, what is it then? Why, it's nothing, I said pettishly. I must say, dear, said Mother, not noticing my manner, that your wonderful devotion to the children, aside from its effect on your health and temper, has given me great delight. I don't see why, I said. Very few girls of your age would give up their whole time as you do to such work. That is because very few girls are as fond of children as I am. There is no virtue in doing exactly what one likes to do. There you go away again, you contrary child, said Mother. If you won't be praised, you won't. So I came up here and moped around a little. I don't see what ails me. But there is an undercurrent of peace that is not entirely disturbed by any outside event. In spite of my follies and my shortcomings, I do believe that God loves and pities me, and will yet perfect that which concerneth me. It is a great mystery, but so is everything. And I wish that I had time to read more. It's quite a story of how she finds out, the true worth of this young man. I have a few more minutes. Maybe I will do that. Oh, I wanted to read a little bit more of Linda Lichter's book called, it was about flowers. And it was about how I don't want to run down florists, because there always have been hothouse flowers. We read about that in Jane Austen, who was it that just picked flowers from an obliging field? And she was talking about how hothouse flowers had replaced picking flowers out of somebody's garden. The coal dealer and the gas man may fear the coming of summer, but florists aren't much worried over the fact that spring flowers will soon be growing on every front yard. The days have gone by when a young man may pick a bouquet of flowers from his own yard and take them to his best girl. Nowadays, she demands a dozen roses or a corsage bouquet bearing the name of the best florist. Girls lost far more than the gift of sentiment when their suitors began picking the florists instead of the flowers. Yes, do you remember those of you who grew up back in the day when we just went flower picking, and just the fun of taking the flowers into our mother from outside, and when it was very symbolic for someone to pick a flower and hand it to someone else. And do you remember in Wives and Daughters, Roger cutting a rose as he was passing by on his horse, cutting a rose and handing it to Molly, and how significant that was, and that seems to be lost. But life gets better as we learn. We can do better, and we can replace things the way they should be. And if you're a homemaker, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to live in a different era. You don't have to have everybody else doing it or the world changing before you can have the kind of life you want. And one of the things that my daughter and I really liked doing was reading. And she read hundreds of books. And she got an idea of how she'd like to live and what kind of life she'd like to have just from these hundreds of books that she read. And so I have a house full of handmade items that she made, little patchwork pillows, little blankets, little quilts, drawings, and things like that. And I just decorated my home with them. And that was what we had at the time. But we lived before we even knew very much about these different eras, Victorian, Jane Austen, or before, we lived as much of that, because all it is going back to whatever's true, lovely, beautiful, noble, and just. And so, ladies, I hope that you get a few things done. This isn't as long as usual, but I wanted to thank you all for what you do for me and the motivation that you give me. And those of you who have contributed, I just really appreciate that. And I also appreciate your comments a lot. Now, I don't have comments on the video channel, but you can go to the link and go to the post and make a comment there. And so, ladies, until I talk to you again, stay close to Christ. Goodbye.